I'm starting a few minutes late today, which is very characteristic for me. So I am gonna jump right in. Left Hand of Darkness, Chapter 15. To the Ice. I woke. Until now, it had been strange, unbelievable, to wake up inside a dim cone of warmth, and to hear my reason tell me that it was a tent, and that I lay in it alive, that I was not still in Pulafen Farm. This time there was no strangeness in my waking, but a grateful sense of peace. Sitting up, I yawned and tried to comb back my matted hair with my fingers. I looked at Estraven, stretched out sound asleep in his sleeping bag a couple of feet from me. He wore nothing but his breeches. He was hot. The dark, secret face was laid bare to the light, to my gaze. Estraven asleep looked a little stupid, like everyone asleep. A round, strong face, relaxed and remote, small drops of sweat on the upper lip and over the heavy brows. I remember how he had stood, sweating, on the parade stand in Arenrung, in panoply of rank and sunlight. I saw him now defenseless and half-naked in a colder light, and for the first time saw him as he was. He woke late and was slow in waking. At last he staggered up yawning, pulled on his shirt, stuck his head out to judge the weather, and then asked me if I wanted a cup of orsh. When he found that I had crawled about and brewed up a pot of the stuff with the water he had left in a pan as ice on the stove last night, he accepted a cup, thanked me stiffly, and sat down to drink it. Where do we go from here, Estraven? It depends on where you want to go, Mr. I, and on what kind of travel you can manage. What's the quickest way out of Orgarain? West, to the coast, 30 miles or so. What then? The harbors will be freezing or already frozen here. In any case, no ships go far out in the winter. It would be a matter of waiting and hiding somewhere until next spring, when the great traders go out to Sith and Purantur. None will be going to Karhide if the trade embargoes continue. We might work our passage on a trader. I am out of money, unfortunately. Is there an alternative? Karhide. Overland. How far is it? 1,000 miles? Yes, by road. But we couldn't go on the roads. We wouldn't get past the first inspector. Our only way would be north, through the mountains, east across the Gobrin, and down to the border at Guthrin Bay. Across the Gobrin? The ice sheet, you mean? He nodded. It's not possible in winter, is it? I think so. With luck, as in all winter journeys. In one respect, a glacier crossing is better in winter. The good weather, you know, tends to stay over the great glaciers, where the ice reflects the heat of the sun. The storms are pushed out to the periphery. Therefore, the legends about the place inside the blizzard. That might be in our favor. Little else. Then you seriously think there would have been no point in taking you from Pulafen Farm if I did not. He was still stiff, sore, grim. Last night's conversation had shaken us both. And I take it that you consider the ice crossing a better risk than waiting around till spring for a sea crossing. He nodded. Solitude, he explained, laconic. I thought it over for a while. I hope you've taken my inadequacies into account. I'm not as cold-proof as you, nowhere near it. I'm no expert on skis. I'm not in good shape, though much improved from a few days ago. Again he nodded. I think we might make it, he said, with that complete simplicity I had so long taken for irony. All right. He glanced at me and drank down his cup of tea. Tea it might as well be called, brewed from roasted perm grain. Orsh is a brown, sweet, sour drink, strong in vitamins A and C, sugar, and a pleasant stimulant to the lobeline. a pleasant stimulant related to lobeline. Where there is no beer on winter, there is orsh. Where there is neither beer nor orsh, there are no people. It will be hard, he said, setting down his cup. Very hard. Without luck, we will not make it. I'd rather die on the ice than in that cesspool you got me out of. He cut off a chunk of dried bread apple, offered me a slice, and sat meditatively chewing. We'll need more food, he said. What happens if we do make it to Carhide? To you, I mean. You're still prescribed. He turned his dark otter's glance at me. Yes, I suppose I'd stay on this side. And when they found you, and when they found you'd helped their prisoner escape? They needn't find it. He smiled, bleak, and said, First, we have to cross the ice. I broke out. Listen, Estraven, will you forgive what I said yesterday? Nuseth. He stood up, still chewing, put on his hide coat and boots, and slipped otter-like out the self-sealing valved door. From outside, he stuck his head back in. I may be late, or gone overnight. Can you manage here? Yes. All right. With that, he was off. I never knew a person who reacted so wholly and rapidly to a changed situation as Estraven. I was recovering and willing to go. He was out of Thangen. The instant that was all clear, he was off. He was never rash or hurried, but he was always ready. It was the secret, no doubt, of the extraordinary political career he threw away for my sake, and it was also the explanation of his belief in me and devotion to my mission. When I came, he was ready. No one else on winter was. Yet he considered himself a slow man, poor in emergencies. Once he told me that, being so slow-thinking, he had to guide his acts by a general intuition of which way his luck was running, so that this intuition rarely failed him. He said it seriously. It may have been true. The foretellers of the fastness are not the only people on winter who can see ahead. They have tamed and trained the hunch, but not increased its certainty. In this matter, the Yomeshta also have a point. The gift is perhaps not strictly or simply one of foretelling, but it is rather the power of seeing, if only for a flash, everything at once, seeing whole. I kept the little heater stove at its hottest setting while Estraven was gone, so got warm clear through for the first time in how long? I thought it must be Thurn now, the first month of winter, and of a new year one, but I had lost count in Pullifen. The stove was one of those excellent and economical devices perfected by the Gathenians in their millennial effort to outwit cold. Only the use of a fusion pack as power source could improve it. Its bionic-powered battery was good for 14 months' continuous use. Its heat output was intense. It was stove, heater, and lantern all in one, and it weighed about 4 pounds. We would never have got 50 miles without it. It must have cost a good deal of Estraven's money, that money I had loftily handed over to him in Mishnori. The tent, which was made of plastics developed for weather resistance and designed to cope with at least some of the inside water condensation that is the plague of tents in cold weather. The Pes-3 fur sleeping bags, the clothes, skis, sledge, food supplies, everything was of the finest make and kind, lightweight, durable, expensive. If he had gone to get more food, what was he going to get it with? He did not return till nightfall the next day. I had gone out several times on snowshoes, gathering strength and getting practice by wading around the slopes of the snowy veil that hid our tent. I was competent on skis, but not much good on snowshoes. I dared not go far over the hilltops lest I lose my backtrack. It was wild country, steep, full of creeks and ravines, rising fast to the cold-haunted mountains eastward. I had time to wonder what I would do in this forsaken place if Estraven did not come back. He came swooping over the dusky hill. He was a magnificent skier, and stopped beside me, dirty and tired and heavy-laden. He had on his back a huge sooty sack stuffed full of bundles, Father Christmas who pops down the chimneys of old Earth. The bundles contained Kadic germ, dried bread apple, tea, and slabs of the hard, red, earthy-tasting sugar that Gathenians refine from one of their tubers. How did you get all this? Stole it, said the one-time Prime Minister of Karhide, holding his hands over the stove, which he had not yet turned down. Even he, was cold. In Turf? Close thing. That was all I ever learned. He was not proud of his exploit, and not able to laugh at it. Stealing is a vile crime on Winter. Indeed, the only man more despised than the thief is the suicide. We'll use up this stuff first, he said, as I set a pan of snow on the stove to melt. It's heavy. Most of the food he had laid in previously was hyperfood rations, fortified, dehydrated, compressed, cubed mixture of high-energy foods. The Orgota name for it is Gitchi Mitchi, and that's what we called it, though of course we spoke Karhaidish together. We had enough of it to last us 60 days at the minimal standard ration, a pound a day apiece. After he had washed up and eaten, Estroven sat a long time by the stove that night, figuring out precisely what we had and how and when we must use it. We had no scales, and he had to estimate, using a pound box of Gitchi Mitchi as standard. He knew, as do many Gathenians, the caloric and nutritive value of each food. He knew his own requirements under various conditions, and how to estimate mine pretty closely. Such knowledge has high survival value on Winter. When, at last, he had got our rations planned out, he rolled over onto his bag and went to sleep. During the night, I heard him talking numbers out of his dreams, weights, days, distances. We had, very roughly, 800 miles to go. The first 100 would be north or northeast, going through the forest and across the northernmost spurs of the Sembenson Range to the Great Glacier, the ice sheet that covers the double-lobed Great Continent everywhere north of the 45th parallel, and in places dips down almost to the 35th. One of these southward extensions is in the region of the Fire Hills, the last peaks of the Sembensons, and that region was our first goal. There among the mountains, Estroven reasoned, we should be able to get onto the surface of the ice sheet, either descending into it from a mountain slope or climbing up to it on the slope of one of its effluent glaciers. Thereafter, we would travel on the ice itself, eastward, for some 600 miles. Where its edge trends north again near the Bay of Guthan, we would come down off it and cut southeast at least 50 or 100 miles across the Shenshei bogs, which by then should be 10 or 20 feet deep in snow to the Karhaidish border. This route kept us clear from start to finish of inhabited or inhabitable country. We would not be meeting any inspectors. This was indubitably of the first importance. I had no papers, and Estroven said that his wouldn't hold up under any further forgeries. In any case, though I could pass for a Gathenian when no one expected anything else, I was not disguisable to an eye looking for me. In these respects, then, the way Estroven proposed for us was highly practical. In all other respects, it seemed perfectly insane. I kept my opinion to myself, for I fully meant what I had said about preferring to die escaping if it came down to a choice of deaths. Estroven, however, was still exploring alternatives. Next day, which we spent in loading and packing the sledge very carefully, he said, "If you raised the starship, When might it come? Anywhere between 8 days and a half months, depending on where it is in its solar orbit relative to Gethin. It might be on the other side of the sun. No sooner? No sooner. The Naphel motive can't be used within a solar system. The ship can come in only on rocket drive, which puts her at least 8 days away. Why? He tugged a cord tight and knotted it before he answered. I was considering the wisdom of trying to ask aid from your world, as mine seems unhelpful. There's a radio beacon in Turif. How powerful? Not very. The nearest big transmitter would be in Kuhemi, about 400 miles south of here. Kuhemi's a big town, isn't it? 250,000 souls. We'd have to get the use of the radio transmitter somehow, then hide out for at least 8 days with the surf alerted. Not much chance. He nodded. I lugged the last sack of Kodak germ out of the tent, fitted it into its niche on the sledge load, and said, if I had called the ship that night in Mishnori, that night you told me to, the night I was arrested. But Obsley has my Ansel. Still has it, I suppose. Can he use it? No, not even by chance fiddling about. The coordinate settings are extremely complex. But if only I'd used it. If only I'd known the game was already over that day, he said and smiled. He was not one for regrets. You did, I think, but I didn't believe you. When the sledge was loaded, he insisted that we spend the rest of the day doing nothing, storing energy. He lay in the tent writing in a little notebook in his small, vapid, vertical cursive Carhide-ish hand, the account that appears as the previous chapter. He hadn't been able to keep his journal during the past month, and that annoyed him. He was pretty methodical about that journal. Its writing was, I think, both an obligation to and a link with his family, the hearth of Estra. I learned that later, however. At the time, I didn't know what he was writing, and I sat waxing skis or doing nothing. I whistled a dance tune and stopped myself in the middle. We only had one tent, and if we were going to share it without driving each other mad, a certain amount of self-restraint of manners was evidently required. Estroven had looked up at my whistling, all right, but not with irritation. He looked at me rather dreamily and said, I wish I'd known about your ship last year. Why did they send you onto this world alone? The first envoy to a world always comes alone. One alien is a curiosity, two are an invasion. The first envoy's life is held cheap. No, the Ecumen doesn't really hold anybody's life cheap, so it follows better to put one life in danger than 2 or 20. It's also very expensive and time-consuming, you know, shipping people over the big jumps. Anyhow, I asked for the job. In danger, honor, he said, evidently a proverb, for he added mildly, we'll be full of honor when we reach Karhide. When he spoke, I found myself believing that we would in fact reach Karhide across 800 miles of mountains, ravine, crevasse, volcano, glacier, ice sheet, frozen bog or frozen bay, all desolate, shelterless, and lifeless, in the storms of midwinter in the middle of an ice age. He sat up writing his records with the same obdurate, patient thoroughness I had seen in a mad king up on a scaffolding mortaring a joint, and said, when we reach Karhide. His when was no mere dateless hope either. He intended to reach Karhide by the 4th day of the 4th month of winter, Arhad Ener. When we were to start tomorrow, the 13th day of the 1st month, Tormin Bod Therm. Our rations, as well as he could calculate, might be stretched at farthest to 3 Gathenian months, 78 days, so we would go 12 miles a day for 70 days and get to Karhide on Arhad Aner. That was all settled. No more to do now, but get a good sleep. We were off at dawn, on snowshoes in a thin, windless snowfall. The surface over the hills was besa, soft and still unpacked, what Terran skiers I think call wild snow. The sledge was heavy loaded. Estervin guessed the total weight to pull something over 300 pounds. It was hard to pull in the fluffy snow, though it was handy as a well-designed little boat. The runners were marvels, coated with a polymer that cut resistance almost to nothing. But of course, that was no good when the whole thing was stuck in a drift. On such a surface, and going up and down slopes and gullies, we found it best to go one in harness pulling and one behind pushing. The snow fell, fine and mild, all day long. We stopped twice for a bite of food. In all the vast, hilly country, there was no sound. We went on, and all of a sudden, it was twilight. We halted in a valley very like the one we had left that morning, a dell among white-humped hills. I was so tired I staggered, yet I could not believe the day was over. We had covered, by the sledge meter, almost 15 miles. If we could go that well in soft snow, fully loaded, through a steep country whose hills and valleys all run athwart our way, then surely we could do better up on the ice with hard snow, a level way and a load always lighter. My trust in Estervin had been more willed than spontaneous. Now I believed in him completely. We would both be in Karhide in 70 days. You've traveled like this before, I asked him. Sledged? Often. Long hauls? I went a couple of 100 miles on the Kerm ice one autumn, years ago. The lower end of Kermland, the mountainous southernmost peninsula of the Karhide semi-continent, is, like the north, glaciated. Humanity on the great continent of Gethin lives in a strip of land between two white walls. A further decrease of 8% in solar radiation, they calculate, would bring the walls creeping together. There would be no men, no land, only ice. What for? Curiosity? Adventure? He hesitated and smiled slightly. The augmentation of the complexity and intensity of the field of intelligent life, he said, quoting one of my ecumenical quotations. Ah, you were consciously extending the evolutionary tendency inherent in being, one manifestation of which is exploration. We were both well pleased with ourselves, sitting in the warm tent, drinking hot tea and waiting for the Kadak germ porridge to boil. That's it, he said. 6 of us, all very young, my brother and I from Estra, 4 of our friends from Stock. There was no purpose for the journey. We wanted to see Terraminder, a mountain that stands up out of the ice down there. Not many people have seen it from the land. The porridge was ready, a different matter from the stiff bran mush of Pullifin Farm. It tasted like the roast chestnuts of Terra and burned the mouth splendidly. Warm through, benevolent, I said. The best food I've eaten from Gethin has always been in your company, Estervin. Not at that banquet in Mishnori. No, that's true. You hate Orgarine, don't you? Very few Orgota know how to cook. Hate Orgarine? No, how should I? How does one hate a country or love one? Tide talks about it. I lack the trick of it. I know people. I know towns, farms, hills and rivers and rocks. I know how the sun at sunset in autumn falls on the side of a certain plowland in the hills. But what is the sense of giving a boundary to all of that, of giving it a name and ceasing to love where the name ceases to apply? What is love of one's country? Is it hate of one's uncountry? Then it's not a good thing. Is it simply self-love? That's a good thing, but one mustn't make a virtue of it, or a profession. Insofar as I love life, I love the hills of the domain of Estra, but that sort of love does not have a boundary line of hate, and beyond that, I am ignorant, I hope. Ignorant in the Harada sense, to ignore the abstraction, to hold fast to the thing. There was in this attitude something feminine, a refusal of the abstract, the ideal, a submissiveness to the given, which rather displeased me. Yet he added, scrupulous, a man who doesn't detest a bad government is a fool. And if there were such a thing as a good government on earth, it would be a great joy to serve it. There we understood each other. I know something of that joy, I said. Yes, so I judged. I rinsed our bowls with hot water and dumped the rinsings out the valve door of the tent. It was blind dark outside. Snow fell fine and thin, just visible in the oval dim shaft of light from the valve. Sealed again in the dry warmth of the tent, we laid out our bags. He said something. Give the bowls to me, Mr. I, or some such remark, and I said, Is it going to be Mr. clear across the Gobrin ice? He looked up and laughed. I don't know what to call you. My name is Genli I. I know. You use my land name. I don't know what to call you either. Hearth. Then I'm I. Who uses first names? Hearth brothers or friends, he said, and saying it was remote, out of reach, 2 feet from me in a tent, 8 feet across. No answer to that. What is more arrogant than honesty? Cooled, I climbed into my fur bag. Good night, I, said the alien, and the other alien said, Good night, Hearth. A friend. What is a friend in a world where any friend may be a lover at a new phase of the moon? Not I, locked in my virility. No friend to Therum Hearth or any other of his race. Neither man nor woman. Neither and both, cyclic, lunar, metamorphosing under the hand's touch. Changelings in the human cradle, they were no flesh of mine, no friends, no love between us. We slept. I woke once and heard the snow ticking thick and soft on the tent. Estraven was up at dawn getting breakfast. The day broke bright. We loaded up and were off as the sun gilded the tops of the scrubby bushes rimming the dell, Estraven pulling in harness and I as pusher and rudder at the stern. The snow was beginning to get a crust on it. On clear downslopes we went like a dog team at a run. That day we skirted and then entered the forest that borders Pullifen Farm, the forest of dwarfs thick-set, neural-limbed, ice-bearded thora trees. We dared not use the main road north, but logging roads lent their direction to us sometimes for a while, and as the forest was kept clear of fallen trees and undergrowth, we got on well. Once we were in Taranpeth, there were fewer ravines or steep ridges. The sledge meter at evening said 20 miles for the day's run, and we were less tired than the night before. One palliative of winter on winter is that the days stays light. The planet has a few degrees of tilt to the plane of the ecliptic, not enough to make an appreciable seasonal difference in low latitudes. Season is not a hemispheric effect, but a global one, a result of the elliptoid orbit. At the far and slow-moving end of the orbit, approaching and departing from aphelion, there is just enough loss of solar radiation to disturb the already uneasy weather patterns, to chill down what is cold already and turn the wet, gray summer into white, violent winter. Drier than the rest of the year, winter might be pleasanter if it were not for the cold. The sun, when you see it, shines high. There is no slow bleeding away of light into the darkness, as on the polar slopes of Earth where cold and night come on together. Gethin has a bright winter, bitter, terrible, and bright. We were 3 days getting through Taranpeth Forest. On the last, Estervan stopped and made camp early in order to set traps. He wanted to catch some pesthree. They are one of the larger land animals of winter, about the size of a fox, oviparous vegetarians with a splendid coat of gray or white fur. He was after the meat, for pesthree are edible. They were migrating south in vast numbers. They are so light-footed and solitary that we saw only 2 or 3 as we hauled, but the snow was thick-starred in every glade of the Thorey forest with countless little snowshoe tracks, all heading south. Estervan's snares were full in an hour or 2. He cleaned and cut up the 6 beasts, hung some of the meat to freeze, stewed some for our meal that night. Gethenians are not a hunting people, because there is very little to hunt. No large herbivores, thus no large carnivores except in the teeming seas. They fish and farm. I had never before seen a Gethenian with blood on his hands. Estervan looked at the white pelts. There's a week's room and board for a pesthree hunter, he said. Gone to waste. He held out one for me to touch. The fur was so soft and deep that you could not be certain where your hand began to feel it. Our sleeping bags, coats, and hoods were lined with that same fur, an unsurpassed insulator, and very beautiful to see. Hardly seems worth it, I said, for a stew. Estervan gave me his brief, dark stare and said, "We need protein," and tossed away the pelts, where overnight the russie, the fierce little rat snakes, would devour them and the entrails and the bones and lick clean the bloody snow. He was right. He was generally right. There was a pound or 2 of edible meat on a pesthree. I ate my half of the stew that night and could have eaten his without noticing. Next morning, when we started up into the mountains, I was twice the sledge engine I had been. We went up that day. The beneficent snowfall and crockset, windless weather 0 degrees Fahrenheit and 20 degrees, that had seen us through Taranpeth and out of range of a probable pursuit, now dissolved wretchedly into above-freezing temperatures and rain. Now I began to understand why Gethenians complain when the temperature rises in winter and cheer up when it falls. In the city, rain is an inconvenience. To a traveler, it is a catastrophe. We hauled that sledge up the flanks of the Sembensanes all morning through a deep, cold porridge of rain-sodden snow. By afternoon, on steep slopes, the snow was mostly gone. Torrents of rain, miles of mud and gravel. We cased the runners, put the wheels on the sledge, and hauled on up. As a wheeled cart, it was a bitch, sticking and tipping every moment. Dark fell before we found any shelter of cliff or cave to set up the tent in, so that despite all our care, things got wet. Estervan had said that a tent such as ours would house us pretty comfortably in any weather at all, so long as we kept it dry inside. Once you can't dry out your bags, you lose too much body heat all night and you don't sleep well. Our food ration's too short to allow us to afford that. We can't count on any sunlight to dry things out, so we must not get them wet. I had listened and had been as scrupulous as he about keeping snow and wet out of the tent, so that there was only the unavoidable moisture from our cooking and our lungs and pores to be evaporated. But this night, everything was wet through before we could get the tent up. We huddled, steaming over the chob stove, and presently had a stew of pesthree meat to eat, hot and solid, good enough almost to compensate for everything else. The sledge meter, ignoring the hard uphill work we had done all day, said we had come only 9 miles. "First day we've done less than our stint," I said. Estraven nodded and neatly cracked a leg bone for the marrow. He had stripped off his wet outer clothes and sat in shirt and breeches, barefoot, collar open. I was still too cold to take off my coat and hide and boots. There he sat, cracking marrow bones, neat, tough, durable, his sleek, fur-like hair shedding the water like a bird's feathers. He dripped a little onto his shoulders like house eaves dripping, and never noticed it. He was not discouraged. He belonged here. The first meat ration had given me some intestinal cramps, and that night they got severe. I lay awake in the soggy darkness, loud with rain. At breakfast, he said, "You had a bad night." "How did you know?" For he slept very deeply, scarcely moving, even when I left the tent. He gave me that look again. "What's wrong?" "Diarrhea?" He winced and said savagely, "It's the meat." "I suppose so. My fault. It's all right." "Can you travel?" "Yes." Rain fell and fell. A west wind off the sea kept the temperature in the 30s, even here at 3,000 or 4,000 feet of altitude. We never saw more than a quarter mile ahead through the gray mist and mass of rain. What slopes rose on above us, I never looked up to see. Nothing to see but rain falling. We went by compass, keeping as much to northward as the cut and veer of the great slopes allowed. The glacier had been over these mountainsides. In the hundreds of thousands of years it had been grinding back and forth across the north. There were tracks scored along granite slopes, long and straight as if cut with a great U-gouge. We could pull the sledge along these scratches sometimes, as if along a road. I did best pulling. I could lean into the harness, and the work kept me warm. When we stopped for a bite at midday, I felt sick and cold and could not eat. We went on, climbing again now. Rain fell and fell and fell. Estraven stopped us under a great overhang of black rock along mid-afternoon. He had the tent up almost before I was out of the harness. He ordered me to go in and lie down. "I'm all right," I said. "You're not," he said. "Go on." I obeyed, but I resented his tone. When he came into the tent with our night's needs, I sat up to cook, it being my turn. He told me, in the same peremptory tone, to lie still. "You needn't order me about," I said. "I'm sorry," he said inflexibly, his back turned. "I'm not sick, you know." No, I didn't know. "If you won't say frankly, I must go by your looks. You haven't recovered your strength, and the going has been hard. I don't know where your limits lie. I'll tell you when I reach them." I was galled by his patronizing. He was a head shorter than I, and built more like a woman than a man, more fat than muscle. When we hauled together, I had to shorten my pace to his, hold in my strength so as not to outpull him, a stallion in harness with a mule. "You're no longer ill, then?" "No, of course I'm tired. So are you." "Yes, I am," he said. "I was anxious about you. We have a long way to go." He had not meant to patronize. He had thought me sick, and sick men take orders. He was frank, and expected a reciprocal frankness that I might not be able to supply. He, after all, had no standards of manliness, of virility, to complicate his pride. On the other hand, if he could lower all his standards of Shifgrithor, as I realized he had done with me, perhaps I could dispense with the more competitive elements of my masculine self-respect, which he certainly understood as little as I understood Shifgrithor. How much of it did we cover today? He looked around and smiled a little, gently. 6 miles, he said. The next day we did 7 miles, the next day 12, and the day after that we came out of the rain and out of the clouds and out of the regions of mankind. It was the 9th day of our journey. We were 5,000 to 6,000 feet above sea level now, on a high plateau full of the evidence of recent mountain building and volcanism. We were in the fire hills of the Sembensane Range. The plateau narrowed gradually to a valley, and the valley to a pass between long ridges. As we approached the end of the pass, the rain clouds were thinning and rending. A cold north wind dispersed them utterly, laying bare the peaks above the ridges to our right and left, basalt and snow, piebald and patchwork of black and white, brilliant under the sudden sun in a dazzling sky. Ahead of us, cleared and revealed by the same vast sweep of the wind, lay twisted valleys, hundreds of feet below, full of ice and boulders. Across those valleys a great wall stood, a wall of ice, and raising our eyes up and still up to the rim of the wall, we saw the ice itself, the Gobrin Glacier, blinding and horizonless to the utmost north, a white the eyes could not look upon. Here and there, out of the valleys full of rubble, and out of the cliffs and bends and masses of the great ice field's edge, black ridges rose. One great mass loomed up out of the plateau to the height of the gateway peaks we stood between, and from its side drifted heavily a mile-long wisp of smoke. Farther off there were others, peaks, pinnacles, black cinder cones on the glacier. Smoke panted from the fiery mouths that opened out of the ice. Estravin stood there in the harness, beside me, looking at that magnificent and unspeakable desolation. "I am glad I have lived to see this," he said. I felt as he did. It was good to have an end to journey towards, but it is the journey that matters in the end. It had not rained here on these north-facing slopes. Snowfields stretched down from the pass into the valleys of the moraine. We stowed the wheels, uncapped the sledge runners, put on our skis, and took off, down, north, onward, into that silent vastness of fire and ice that said in enormous letters of black and white, "Death, death," written right across a continent. The sledge pulled like a feather, and we laughed with joy. What a good fucking chapter. Chapter 16. Between Drummer and Dramagole. Odrini Thurn. I asks from his sleeping bag, "What is it you're writing, Hearth?" "A record." He laughs a little. "I ought to be keeping a journal for the ecumenical files, but I could never stick to it without a voice writer." I explain that my notes are intended for my people at Estra, who will incorporate them as they see fit into the records of the domain. This turning my thoughts to my hearth and my son, I seek to turn them away again and ask, Your parents, that is, are they alive?" "No," says I. 70 years dead." I puzzled at it. I was not 30 years old. "You're counting years of a different length than ours." "No. Oh, I see. I've time jumped. 20 years from Earth to Hain Davenant, from 50 to Elul, from Elul to here, 17. I've only lived off Earth 7 years, but I was born there 120 years ago." Long since, in Erenrung, he had explained to me how time is shortened inside the ships that go almost as fast as starlight between the stars, but I had not laid this fact down against the length of a man's life, or the lives he leaves behind him on his own world. While he lived a few hours in one of those unimaginable ships going from one planet to another, everyone he had left behind him at home grew old and died, and their children grew old. I said at last. I thought myself an exile. You for my sake, I for yours, he said, and laughed again, a slight, cheerful sound in the heavy silence. These 3 days since we came down from the pass had been much hard work for no gain, but I is no longer downcast nor over-hopeful, and he has more patience with me. Maybe the drugs are sweated out of him. Maybe we have learned to pull together. We spent this day coming down from the basaltic spur, which we spent yesterday climbing. From the valley, it looked a good road up onto the ice, but the higher we went, the more scree and slick rock face we met, and a grade ever steeper, till even without the sledge, we could not have climbed it. Tonight we are back down at the foot of it in the moraine, the valley of stones. Nothing grows here. Rock, pebble dump, boulder fields, clay, mud. An arm of the glacier has withdrawn from this slope within the last 50 or 100 years, leaving the planet's bones raw to the air, no flesh of earth or of grass. Here and there, fumaroles cast a heavy yellowish fog over the ground, low and creeping. The air smells of sulfur. It is 12 degrees still, overcast. I hope no heavy snow falls until we have got over the evil ground between this place and the glacier arm we saw some miles to the west from the ridge. It seems to be a wide ice river running down from the plateau between two mountains, volcanoes, both capped with steam and smoke. If we can get onto it from the slopes of the nearer volcano, it may provide us a road up onto the plateau of ice. To our east, a smaller glacier comes down to a frozen lake, but it runs curving, and even from here, the great crevasses in it can be seen. It is impossible to us, equipped as we are. We agreed to try the glacier between the volcanoes, though by going west to it, we lose at least 2 days' mileage towards our goal. One in going west and one in regaining the distance. Aposthathern. Snowing Nezerim. Fine snow on a moderate gale, a light blizzard. No travel in this. We both slept all day. We have been hauling nearly a half-month. The sleep does us good. Otorman Bodthern. Snowing Neserim. Enough sleep. I taught me a Terran game, played on squares of little stone, called Go, an excellent, difficult game. As he remarked, there are plenty of stones here to play Go with. He endures the cold pretty well, and if courage were enough, it would stand it like a snow worm. It is odd to see him bundled up in hide and overcoat with the hood up when the temperature is above 0. But when we sledge, if the sun is out, or the wind not too bitter, he takes off the coat soon and sweats like one of us. We must compromise as to the heating of the tent. He would keep it hot, I cold, and either's comfort is the other's pneumonia. We strike a medium, and he shivers outside his bag while I swelter in mine. But considering from what distances we have come together to share this tent a while, we do well enough. Thunern. Clear after the blizzard, wind down, the thermometer around 15 degrees all day. We are camped on the lower western slope of the nearer volcano, Mount Dremagole, on my map of Orgarain. Its companion across the ice river is called Drumner. The map is poorly made. There is a great peak visible to the west, not shown on it at all. It is all out of proportion. The Argota evidently do not often come into their fire hills. Indeed, there is not much to come for except grandeur. We hauled 11 miles today. Difficult work, all rock. I is asleep already. I bruised the tendon of my heel, wrenching it like a fool when my foot was caught between two boulders and limped out the afternoon. Tonight's rest should heal it. Tomorrow we get down onto the glacier. Our food supplies seem to have sunk alarmingly, but it is because we have been eating the bulky stuff. We had between 90 and 100 pounds of coarse foodstuffs, half of it the load I stole in Turf. 60 pounds of this are gone after 15 days' journey. I have started on the Gitchy Mitchy at £1 a day, saving 2 sacks of Kodak germ, some sugar, and a chest of dried fish cakes for variety later. I am glad to be rid of that heavy stuff from Turf. The sledge pulls lighter. Swordney Thunern. In the 20s, frozen rain, wind pouring down the ice river like the draft in a tunnel. Camped a quarter-mile in from the edge, on a long, flat streak of firn. The way down from the Dremagole was rough and steep, on bare rock and rock fields, the glacier's edge heavily crevassed, and so foul with gravel and rocks caught in the ice that we tried the sledge on wheels there, too. Before we had got 100 yards, a wheel wedged fast and the axle bent. We used runners henceforth. We made only 4 miles today, still in the wrong direction. The effluent glacier seems to run on a long curve westerly up to the Gobrin Plateau. Here, between the volcanoes, it is about 4 miles wide, and should not be hard going farther in towards the center, though it is more crevassed than I had hoped, and the surface rotten. Drumner is an eruption. The sleet on one's lips tastes of smoke and sulfur. A darkness lowered all day in the west, even under the rain clouds. From time to time, all things, clouds, icy rain, ice, air, would turn a dull red, then fade slowly back to gray. The glacier shakes a little under our feet. Eskewitchway, Ram-Ir Hare, hypothesized that the volcanic activity in northwest Orgarene and the archipelago had been increasing during the last 10 or 20 millennia, and presages the end of the ice, or at least a recession of it, and an interglacial period. CO2 released by the volcanoes into the atmosphere will, in time, serve as an insulator, holding in the long-wave heat energy reflected from the Earth, while permitting direct solar heat to enter undiminished. The average world temperatures, he says, would in the end be raised some 30 degrees till it attains 72 degrees. I am glad I shall not be present. I says that similar theories have been propounded by Terran scholars to explain the still incomplete recession of their last age of ice. All such theories remain largely irrefutable and unprovable. No one knows certainly why the ice comes, why it goes. The snow of ignorance remains untrodden. Over Drumner in the dark, now a great table of dull fire burns. Epstharanern. The meter reads 16 miles hauled today, but we are not more than 8 miles in a straight line from last night's camp. We are still in the ice pass between the two volcanoes. Drumner is in eruption. Worms of fire crawl down its black sides, seen when the wind clears off the roil and seethe of ash cloud and smoke cloud and white steam. Continuously, with no pause, a hissing mutter fills the air, so huge and so long a sound that one cannot hear it when one stops to listen. Yet it fills all the interstices of one's being. The glacier trembles perpetually, snaps and crashes, jitters under our feet, and the snow bridges that the blizzard may have laid across the crevasses are gone, shaken down, knocked in by this drumming and jumping of the ice and the earth beneath the ice. We go back and forth, seeking the end of a slit in the ice that would allow the sledge whole, then seeking the end of the next, trying to go north and forced always to go west or east. Above us, Above us, Dremengole, in sympathy with Drumner's labor, grumbles and farts foul smoke. Eye's face was badly frostbitten this morning. Nose, ears, chin, all dead gray when I chanced to look at him. Needed him back to life and no damage done. But we must be more careful. The wind that blows down off the ice is, in simple truth, deadly, and we have to face it as we haul. I shall be glad to get off this slit and wrinkled ice arm between two growling monsters. Mountains should be seen, not heard. Arhad Thanern. Some Sova snow, between 15 and 20 degrees. We went 12 miles today, about 5 of them profitable, and the rim of the Gobrin is visibly nearer, north above us. We now see the ice river to be miles wide. The arm between Drumner and Dremegole is only 1 finger, and we are now on the back of the hand. Turning and looking down from this camp, one sees the glacier flow split, divided, torn and churned by the black, steaming peaks that thwart it. Looking ahead, one sees it broaden, rising and curving slowly, dwarfing the dark ridges of the earth, meeting the ice wall far above under the veils of cloud and smoke and snow. Cinders and ash now fall within the snow, and the ice is thick, with clinkers on it or sunk in it. A good walking surface, but rather rough for hauling, and the runners need recoating already. 2 or 3 times, volcanic projectiles hit the ice quite near us. They hiss loudly as they strike and burn themselves a socket in the ice. Cinders patter, falling with the snow. We creep infinitesimally northward through the dirty chaos of the world in the process of making itself. Praise then, creation unfinished. Netherhard Thanern. No snow since morning, overcast and windy, at about 15 degrees. The great multiple glacier we are on feeds down into the valley from the west, and we are on its extreme eastern edge. Dremegole and Drumner are now somewhat behind us, though a sharp ridge of Dremegole still rises east of us, almost at eye level. We have crept and crawled up to a point where we must choose between following the glacier on its long sweep westward and so up gradually onto the plateau of ice, or climbing the ice cliffs a mile north of tonight's camp, and so saving 20 or 30 miles of hauling at the cost of risk. I favors the risk. There is a frailty about him. He is all unprotected, exposed, vulnerable, even to his sexual organ which he must carry always outside himself. But he is strong, unbelievably strong. I am not sure he can keep hauling any longer than I can, but he can haul harder and faster than I, twice as hard. He can lift the sledge at front or rear to ease it over an obstacle. I could not lift and hold that weight unless I was in Dotha. To match his frailty and strength, he has a spirit easy to despair and quick to defiance, a fierce, impatient courage. This slow, hard, crawling work we have been doing these days wears him out in body and will, so that if he were, I should think him a coward. But he is anything but that. He has a ready bravery I have never seen the like of. He is ready, eager, to stake life on the cruel, quick test of the precipice. Fire and fear, good servants, bad lords. He makes fear serve him. I would have let fear lead me around by the long way. Courage and reason are with him. What good seeking the safe course on a journey such as this? There are senseless courses which I shall not take, but there is no safe one. Streth Thanern. No luck. No way to get the sledge up, though we spent the day at it. Sova snow in flurries, thick ash mixed with it. It was dark all day, as the wind veering around from the west again blew the pall of Drumner's smoke on us. Up here the ice shakes less, but there came a great quake while we tried to climb a shelving cliff. It shook free the sledge where we had wedged it, and I was pulled down 5 or 6 feet with a bump. But I had a good handhold, and his strength saved us from all careening down to the foot of the cliff, 20 feet or more. If one of us breaks a leg or shoulder in these exploits, that is probably the end for both of us. There, precisely, is the risk, rather an ugly one when looked at closely. The lower valley of the glaciers behind us is white with steam. Lava touches ice down there. We certainly cannot go back. Tomorrow we shall try the ascent, farther west. Baron Thanern. No luck. We must go farther west. Dark as late twilight all day. Our lungs are raw, not from cold, it remains well above 0 even at night with this west wind, but from breathing the ash and fumes of the eruption. By the end of this second day of wasted effort, scrabbling and squirming over pressure blocks and up ice cliffs always to be stopped by a sheer face or overhang, trying farther on and failing again, I was exhausted and enraged. He looked ready to cry, but did not. I believe he considers crying either evil or shameful. Even when he was very ill and weak, the first days of our escape, he hid his face from me when we wept. Reasons, personal, racial, social, sexual. How can I guess why I must not weep? Yet his name is a cry of pain. For that, I first sought him out in Erinrang a long time ago, it seems now. Hearing talk of an alien, I asked his name, and heard for answer a cry of pain from a human throat across the night. Now he sleeps. His arms tremble and twitch, muscular fatigue. The world around us, ice and rock, ash and snow, fire and dark, trembles and twitches and mutters. Looking out a minute ago, I saw the glow of the volcano as a dull red bloom on the belly of the vast clouds overhanging the darkness. Orny Thanern. No luck. This is the 22nd day of our journey, and since the 10th day, we have made no progress eastward. Indeed, have lost 20 or 22 miles by going west. Since the 18th day, we have made no progress of any kind, and might as well have sat still. If we ever do get up on the ice, will we have food enough left to take us across it? This thought is hard to dismiss. Fog and murk of the eruption cut seeing very close, so that we cannot choose our path well. I wants to attack each ascent, however steep, that shows any sign of shelving. He is impatient with my caution. We have got to watch our tempers. I will be in Khmer in a day or so, and all strains will increase. Meanwhile, we butt our heads on cliffs of ice in a cold dusk full of ashes. If I wrote a new Yomesh canon, I should send thieves here after death. Thieves who steal sacks of food by night in Turif. Thieves who steal a man's hearth and name from him, and send him out ashamed and exiled. My head is thick. I must cross out all this stuff later. Too tired to reread it now. Harhahad Thanern. On the Gobrin. The 23rd day of our journey, we are on the Gobrin ice. As soon as we set out this morning, we saw, only a few hundred yards beyond last night's camp, a pathway open up to the ice, a highway curving broad and cinder-paved from the rubble and chasms of the glacier right up to the cliffs, through the cliffs of ice. We walked up it, as if strolling along the Cess embankment. We are on the ice. We are headed east again, homeward. I am infected by I's pure pleasure at our achievement. Looked at soberly, it is as bad as ever up here. where on the plateau's rim, crevasses, some wide enough to sink villages in, not house by house, but all at once, run inland, northward, right out of sight. Most of them cut across our way, so we too must go north, not east. The surface is bad. We screw the sledge along amongst great lumps and chunks of ice, immense debris, pushed up by the straining of the great plastic sheet of ice against and among the fire hills. The broken pressure ridges take queer shapes, overturned towers, legless giants, catapults. A mile thick to start with, the ice here rises and thickens, trying to flow over the mountains and choke the fire mouths with silence. Some miles to the north, peak rises up out of the ice. The sharp, graceful, barren cone of a young volcano, younger by thousands of years than the ice sheet that grinds and shoves, all shattered into chasms and jammed up into great blocks and ridges over 6,000 feet of lower slopes that we cannot see. During the day, turning, we saw the smoke of Drumner's eruption hang behind us like a gray-brown extension of the surface of the ice. A steady wind blows along at ground level in the northeast, clearing this higher air of the soot and stink of the planet's bowels which we have breathed for days, flattening out the smoke behind us to cover, like a dark lid, the glaciers, the lower mountains, the valleys of stones, the rest of the earth. There is nothing, the ice says, but ice. The young volcano, there to the northward, has another word it thinks of saying. No snowfall. A thin high overcast. -4 on the plateau at dusk. A jumble of fern, new ice, and old ice underfoot. The new ice is tricky, slick blue stuff just hidden by a white glaze. We have both been down a good deal. I slid 15 feet on my belly across one such slick. I, in harness, doubled up laughing. He apologized and explained he had thought himself the only person on Gethin who ever slipped on ice. 13 miles today, but if we try to keep up such a pace among these cut, heaped, crevassed pressure ridges, we shall wear ourselves out or come to worse grief than a belly slide. The waxing moon is low, dull as dried blood. A great, brownish, iridescent halo surrounds it. Gairne Thernern. Some snow, rising wind, and falling temperature. 13 miles again today, which brings our distance, logged since we left our first camp, to 254 miles. We've averaged about 10.5 miles a day, 11.5 omitting the 2 days spent waiting out the blizzard. 75 to 100 of those miles of hauling gave us no onward gain. We are not much nearer Carhide than we were when we started out, but we stand a better chance, I think, of getting there. Since we came up out of the volcano murk, our spirit is not all spent in work and worry, and we talk again in the tent after our dinner. As I am in Kemer, I would find it easier to ignore I's presence, but this is difficult in a two-man tent. The trouble is, of course, that he is, in his curious fashion, also in Kemer, always in Kemer. A strange, low-grade sort of desire it must be to be spread out over every day of the year and never know the choice of sex, but there it is. And here am I. Tonight, my extreme physical awareness of him was rather hard to ignore, and I was too tired to divert it into untrance or any other channel of the discipline. Finally, he asked, had he offended me? I explained my silence with some embarrassment. I was afraid he would laugh at me. After all, he is no more an oddity, a sexual freak, than I am. Up here on the ice, each of us is singular, isolate. I as cut off from those like me, from my society and its rules, as he from his. There is no world full of other Gathenians here to explain and support my existence. We are equals at last, equal, alien, alone. He did not laugh, of course. Rather, he spoke with a gentleness that I did not know was in him. After a while, he too came to speak of isolation, of loneliness. Your race is appallingly alone in its world. No other mammalian species, no other ambisexual species, no animal intelligent enough even to domesticate as pets. It must color your thinking, this uniqueness. I don't mean scientific thinking only, though you are extraordinary hypothesizers. It's extraordinary that you arrived at any concept of evolution, faced with that unbridgeable gap between yourselves and the lower animals. But philosophically, emotionally, to be so solitary in so hostile a world, it must affect your entire outlook. The Ameshta would say that man's singularity is his divinity. Lords of the earth, yes. Other cults on other worlds have come to the same conclusion. They tend to be the cults of dynamic, aggressive, ecology-breaking cultures. Orgarain is in the pattern in its way. At least they seem to be bent on pushing things around. What do the Handaradas say? Well, in the Handara, there's no theory, no dogma. Maybe they are less aware of the gap between men and beasts, more occupied with the likeness, the links, the whole of which living things are a part. Tormersley had been all day in my mind, and I said the words. Light is the left hand of darkness, and darkness the right hand of light. Two are one, life and death, lying together like lovers in Khmer, like hands joined together, like the end and the way. My voice shook as I said the lines, for I remembered as I said them that in the letter my brother wrote to me before his death, he had quoted the same words. I brooded, and after some time he said, You're isolated, undivided. Perhaps you are as obsessed with wholeness as we are with dualism. We are dualists too. Duality is an essential, isn't it? So long as there is myself and the other. I and thou, he says. Yes, it does, after all, go even wider than sex. Tell me, how does the other sex of your race differ from yours? He looked startled, and in fact, my question rather startled me. Khmer brings out these spontaneities in one. We were both self-conscious. I never thought of that, he said. You've never seen a woman. He used his Terran language word, which I knew. I saw your pictures of them. The women looked like pregnant Gathenians, but with larger breasts. Do they differ much from your sex in mind behavior? Are they like a different species? No. Yeah, yes, no. Of course not, not really, but the difference is very important. I suppose the most important thing, the heaviest single factor in one's life, is whether one's born male or female. In most societies, it determines one's expectations, activities, outlook, ethics, manners, almost everything. Vocabulary, semiotic usages, clothing, even food. Women tend to eat less. It's extremely hard to separate the innate differences from the learned ones. Even where women participate equally with men in society, there's still, after all, they still, after all, do all the childbearing, and so most of the child rearing. Equality is not the general rule, then? Are they mentally inferior? I don't know. They don't seem to turn up mathematicians or composers of music or inventors or abstract thinkers. But it isn't that they're stupid. Physically, they're less muscular, but a little more durable than men. Psychologically, after he had stared a long time at the glowing stove, he shook his head. Hearth, he said. I can't tell you what women are like. I never thought about it much in the abstract, and God, by now I've practically forgotten. I've been here 2 years. You don't know. In a sense, women are more alien to me than you are. With you I share one sex, anyhow." He looked away and laughed, rueful and uneasy. My own feelings were complex, and we let the matter drop. Yurni Thanern. 18 miles today. East-northeast by compass, on skis. We got clear of the pressure ridges and crevasses in the first hour of pulling. Both got in harness. I had at first with the probe, but no more need for testing. The firn is a couple feet thick over solid ice, and on the firn lie several inches of sound new snow from the last fall, with a good surface. Neither we nor the sledge broke through at all, and the sledge pulled so light that it was hard to believe we were still hauling about 100 pounds apiece. During the afternoon, we took turns hauling, as one can do it easily on this splendid surface. It is a pity that all the hard work uphill and over rock came while the load was heavy. Now we go light. Too light. I find myself thinking about food a good deal. We eat, I says, ethereally. All day we went light and fast over the level ice plain, and dead white under a gray blue sky, unbroken except for the few black Nunatak peaks now far behind us, and a smudge of darkness, Drumner's breath, behind them. Nothing else. The veiled sun. The ice. Chapter 17. An Argota creation myth. The origins of this myth are prehistorical. It has been recorded in many forms. This very primitive version is from a pre-Yomesh written text found in the Isenpeth cave shrine of the Gobrin hinterlands. In the beginning, there was nothing but ice and the sun. Over many years, the sun shining melted a great crevasse in the ice. In the sides of this crevasse were great shapes of ice, and there was no bottom to it. Drops of water melted from the ice shapes in the sides of the chasm and fell down and down. One of the ice shapes said, "I bleed." Another of the ice shapes said, "I weep." A third one said, "I sweat." The ice shapes climbed up out of the abyss and stood on the plains of ice. He that said, "I bleed," he reached up to the sun and pulled out handfuls of excrement from the bowels of the sun, and with that dung made the hills and valleys of the earth. He that said, "I weep," breathed on the ice, and melting it made the seas and the rivers. He that said, "I sweat," gathered up soil and sea water, and with them made trees, plants, herbs, and grains of the field, animals, and men. The plants grew in the soil and the sea, and the beasts ran on the land and swam in the sea, but the men did not wake. 39 of them there were. They slept on the ice and would not move. Then the 3 ice shapes stooped down and sat with their knees drawn up and let the sun melt them. As milk they melted, and the milk ran into the mouths of the sleepers, and the sleepers woke. That milk is drunk by the children of men alone, and without it, that they will not wake to life. The first to wake up was Edondorath. So tall was he that when he stood up, his head split the sky, and snow fell down. He saw the others stirring and awakening, and he was afraid of them when they moved, so he killed one after another with a blow of his fist. 36 of them he killed. But one of them, the next to last one, ran away. Haharath he was called. Far he ran over the plains of ice and over the lands of earth. Edondorath ran behind him and caught up with him at last and smote him. Haharath died. Then Edondurath returned to the birthplace on the Gobrin ice where the bodies of the others lay. The last one was gone. He had escaped while Edondurath pursued Haharath. Edondurath built a house from the frozen bodies of his brothers and waited there inside that house for the last one to come back. Each day one of the corpses would speak, saying, "Does he burn? Does he burn?" And the other corpses would say with frozen tongues, "No, no." Then Edondurath entered Kemer as he slept, and moved and spoke aloud in dreams, and when he woke the corpses were all saying, "He burns, he burns." And the last brother, the youngest one, heard them saying that, and came into the house of bodies, and there coupled with Edondurath. Of these two there were nations of men born, out of the flesh of Edondurath, out of Edondurath's womb. The name of the other brother, the younger brother, the father, his name is not known. Each of the children born to them had a piece of darkness that followed him about wherever he went by daylight. Edondurath said, "Why are my sons thus followed by darkness?" His Kemering said, "Because they were born in the house of flesh, therefore death follows at their heels. They are in the middle of time. In the beginning there was sun and ice, and there was no shadow. In the end, when we are done, the sun will devour itself, and shadow will eat light, and there will be nothing left but the ice and the darkness." We've got about 20 pages left. Chapter 18, On the Ice. Sometimes, as I am falling asleep in a dark, quiet room, I have for a moment a great and treasurable illusion of the past. The wall of a tent leans up over my face, not visible but audible, a slanting plane of faint sound, the susurrus of blown snow. Nothing can be seen. The light emission of the Chab stove is cut off, and it exists only as a sphere of heat, a heart of warmth. The faint dampness and confining cling of my sleeping bag, the sound of snow, barely audible, Estraven's breathing as he sleeps, darkness, nothing else. We are inside, the two of us, in shelter, at rest, at the center of all things. Outside, as always, lies the great darkness, cold, death's solitude. In such fortunate moments as I fall asleep, I know beyond doubt what the real center of my own life is, that time which is past and lost, and yet it is permanent, the enduring moment, the heart of warmth. I am not trying to say that I was happy during those weeks of hauling a sledge across an ice sheet in the dead of winter. I was hungry, overstrained, and often anxious, and it all got worse the longer it went on. I certainly wasn't happy. Happiness has to do with reason, and only reason earns it. What I was given was the thing you can't earn, and can't keep, and often don't even recognize at the time. I mean joy. I always woke up first, usually before daylight. My metabolic rate is slightly over the Gathenian norm, as are my height and weight. Astraven had figured these differences into the food ration calculations in his scrupulous way, which one could see as either housewifely or scientific, and from the start I had had a couple of ounces more food per day than he. Protests of injustice fell silent before the self-evident justice of this unequal division. However divided, the share was small. I was hungry, constantly hungry, daily hungrier. I woke up because I was hungry. If it was still dark, I turned up the light of the Chab stove and put a pan of ice brought in the night before, now thawed, on the stove to boil. Estraven, meanwhile, engaged in his customary fierce and silent struggle with sleep, as if he wrestled with an angel. Winning, he sat up, stared at me vaguely, shook his head, and woke. By the time we were dressed and booted and had the bags rolled up, breakfast was ready. A mug of boiling hot orsh and 1 cube of gitchy-mitchy expanded by hot water into a sort of small, doughy bun. We chewed slowly, solemnly, retrieving all dropped crumbs. The stove cooled as we ate. We packed it up with the pan and mugs, pulled on our hooded overcoats and our mittens, and crawled out into the open air. The coldness of it was perpetually incredible. Every morning I had to believe it all over again. If one had been outside to relieve oneself already, the second exit was only harder. Sometimes it was snowing. Sometimes the long light of early day lay wonderfully gold and blue across the miles of ice. Most often, it was gray. We brought the thermometer into the tent with us nights, and when we took it outside, it was interesting to watch the pointer swing to the right. Gethenian dials read counterclockwise, almost too fast to follow, registering a drop of 20, 50, 80 degrees, till it stopped somewhere between 0 and -60. One of us collapsed the tent and folded it while the other loaded stove, bags, etc. onto the sledge. The tent was strapped over all, and we were ready for skis and harness. Little metal was used in our straps and fittings, but the harnesses had buckles of aluminum alloy, too fine to fasten with mittens on, which burned in that cold exactly as if they were red hot. I had to be very careful of my fingers when the temperature was below -20, especially if the wind blew, for I could pick up a frostbite amazingly fast. My feet never suffered, and that was a factor of major importance in a winter journey where an hour's exposure can, after all, cripple one for a week or for life. Estroven had to guess my size, and the snow boots he got me were a little large, but extra socks filled the discrepancy. We put on our skis, got into the harness as quick as possible, bucked and pried and jolted the sledge free if its runners were frozen in, and set off. Mornings after heavy snowfall, we might have to spend some while digging out the tent and sledge before we could set off. The new snow was not hard to shovel away, though it made great impressive drifts around us, who were, after all, the only impediment for hundreds of miles, the only thing sticking out above the ice. We pulled eastward by the compass. The usual direction of the wind was north to south off the glacier. Day after day, it blew from our left as we went. The hood did not suffice against that wind, and I wore a facial mask to protect my nose and left cheek. Even so, my left eye froze shut one day, and I thought I had lost the use of it. Even when Estroven thought it open with breath and tongue, I could not see with it for some while, so probably more had been frozen than the lashes. In sunlight, both of us wore the Gethenian slit-screen eye shields, and neither of us suffered any snow blindness. We had small opportunity. The ice, as Estroven had said, tends to hold a high-pressure zone above its central area, where thousands of square miles of white reflect the sunlight. We were not in the central zone, however, but at best on the edge of it, between it and the zone of turbulent, deflected, precipitation-laden storms that it sends continually to torment the subglacial lands. Wind from due north brought bare, bright weather, but from northeast or northwest it brought snow, or harrowed up dry, fallen snow into blinding, biting clouds like sand or dust storms, or else, sinking almost to nothing, crept in sinuous trails along the surface, leaving the sky white, the air white, no visible sun, no shadow, and the snow itself, the ice, disappeared from under our feet. Around midday we would halt and cut and set up a few blocks of ice for a protective wall if the wind was strong. We heated water to soak a cube of Gitchi-Mitchi in, and drank the water hot, sometimes with a bit of sugar melted in it. Harnessed up again, and went on. We seldom talked while on the march or at lunch, for our lips were sore, and when one's mouth was open, the cold got inside, hurting teeth and throat and lungs. It was necessary to keep the mouth closed and breathe through the nose, at least when the air was 40 or 50 degrees below freezing. When it went on lower than that, the whole breathing process was further complicated by the rapid freezing of one's exhaled breath. If you didn't look out, your nostrils might freeze shut, and then to keep from suffocating, you would gasp a lungful of razors. Under certain conditions, our exhalations freezing instantly made a tiny cracking noise, like distant firecrackers, and a shower of crystals, each breath a snowstorm. We pulled till we were tired out, or till it began to grow dark, halted, set up the tent, pegged down the sledge if there was a threat of high wind, and settled in for the night. On a usual day, we would have pulled for 11 or 12 hours and made between 12 and 18 miles. It does not seem a very good rate, but then conditions were a bit averse. The crust of the snow was seldom right for both skis and sledge runners. When it was light and new, the sledge ran through rather than over it. When it was partly hardened, the sledge would stick, but we on skis would not, which meant that we were perpetually being pulled up backward with a jolt, and when it was hard, it was often heaped up in long wind waves, sastrugi, that in some places ran up to 4 feet high. We had to haul the sledge up and over each knife-edged or fantastically corniced top, and slide her down and up over the next one, for they never seemed to run parallel to our course. I had imagined the Gobrin ice plateau to be all one sheet, like a frozen pond, but there were hundreds of miles of it, that were rather like an abruptly frozen, storm-raised sea. The business of setting up camp, making everything secure, getting all the clinging snow off one's outer clothing, and so on, was trying. Sometimes it did not seem worthwhile. It was so late, so cold, one was so tired, that it would be much easier to lie down in a sleeping bag in the lee of the sledge and not bother with the tent. I remember how clear it was to me on certain evenings, how bitterly I resented my companion's methodical, tyrannical insistence that we do everything and do it correctly and thoroughly. I hated him at such times, with a hatred that rose straight up out of the death that lay within my spirit. I hated the harsh, intricate, obstinate demands that he made on me in the name of life. When all was done, we would enter the tent, and almost at once the heat of the chob stove could be felt as an enveloping, protecting ambiance. A marvelous thing surrounded us. Warmth. Death and cold were elsewhere, outside. Hatred was also left outside. We ate and drank. After we ate, we talked. When the cold was extreme, even the excellent insulation of the tent could not keep it out, and we lay in our bags as close to the stove as possible. A little fur of frost gathered on the inner surface of the tent. To open the valve was to let in a draft of cold that instantly condensed, filling the tent with a swirling mist of fine snow. When there was blizzard, needles of icy air blew in through the vents, elaborately protected as they were, and an impalpable dust of snow motes fogged the air. On those nights, the storm made an incredible noise, and we could not converse by voice unless we shouted with our heads together. Other nights it was still, with such a stillness as one imagines as existing before the stars began to form, or after everything has perished. Within an hour after our evening meal, Estroven turned the stove down, if it was feasible to do so, and turned the light emission off. As he did so, he murmured a short and charming grace of invocation, the only ritual words I had ever learned of the Handara. Praise then, darkness, and creation unfinished, he said. And there was darkness. We slept. In the morning, it was all to do over. We did it for over 50 days. Estroven kept up his journal, though during the weeks on the ice he seldom wrote more than a note of the weather and the distance we had come that day. Among these notes there is occasional mention of his own thoughts or of some of our conversation, but not a word concerning the profounder conversation between us which occupied our rest between dinner and sleep on many nights of the first month on the ice, while we still had enough energy to talk, and on certain days we spent stormbound in the tent. I told him that I was not forbidden, but expected, to use paraverbal speech on a non-ally planet, and asked him to keep what he learned from his own people, at least until I could discuss what I had done with my colleagues on the ship. He assented and kept his word. He never said or wrote anything concerning our silent conversation. Mind speech was the only thing I had to give Estrevan out of all my civilization, my alien reality in which he was so profoundly interested. I could talk and describe endlessly, but that was all I had to give. Indeed, it may be the only important thing we have to give Winter, but I can't say that gratitude was my motive for infringing on the law of cultural embargo. I was not paying my debt to him. Such debt remains owing. Estrevan and I had simply arrived at the point where we shared whatever we had that was worth sharing. I expect it will turn out that sexual intercourse is possible between Gathenian double-sexed and Hainish norm one-sexed human beings, though such intercourse will inevitably be sterile. It remains to be proved. Estrevan and I proved nothing, except perhaps a rather subtler point. The nearest to crisis that our sexual desires brought us was on a night early in the journey, our second night up on the ice. We had spent all day struggling and backtracking in the cut-up, crevassed area of the Fire Hills, east of the Fire Hills. We were tired that evening, but elated, sure that a clear course would soon open out ahead. But after dinner, Estrevan grew taciturn and cut my talk off short. I said at last, after a direct rebuff, "Hearth, I've said something wrong again. Please tell me what it is." He was silent. "I've made some mistake in Shifgrithor. I'm sorry, I can't learn. I've never even really understood the meaning of the word." Shifgrithor? It comes from an old word for shadow. We were both silent for a little, and then he looked at me with a direct, gentle gaze. His face in the reddish light was as soft, as vulnerable, as remote as the face of a woman who looks at you out of her thoughts and does not speak. And I saw then again, and for good, what I had always been afraid to see, and had pretended not to see in him. That he was a woman as well as a man. Any need to explain the sources of that fear vanished with the fear. What I was left with was, at last, acceptance of him as he was. Until then, I had rejected him, refused him his own reality. He'd been quite right to say that he, the only person on Gethen who trusted me, was the only Gathenian I distrusted. For he was the only one who had entirely accepted me as a human being, who had liked me personally and given me entire personal loyalty, and who therefore had demanded of me an equal degree of recognition, of acceptance. I had not been willing to give it. I had been afraid to give it. I had not wanted to give my trust, my friendship, to a man who was a woman who was a man. He explained, stiffly and simply, that he was in Khmer and had been trying to avoid me insofar as one of us could avoid the other. "I must not touch you," he said, with extreme constraint. Saying that, he looked away. I said, "I understand. I agree completely." For it seemed to me, and I think to him, that it was from that sexual tension between us, admitted now and understood, but not assuaged, that the great and sudden assurance of friendship between us rose. A friendship so much needed by us both in our exile, and already so well proved in the days and nights of our bitter journey, that it might as well be called, now as later, love. But it was from the difference between us, not from the affinities and likenesses, but from the difference that love came. And it was itself the bridge, the only bridge across what divided us. For us to meet sexually would be for us to meet once more as aliens. We had touched in the only way we could touch. We left it at that. I do not know if we were right. We talked some more that night, and I recall being very hard put to it to answer coherently when he asked me what women were like. We were both rather stiff and cautious with each other for the next couple of days. A profound love between two people involves, after all, the power and chance of doing profound hurt. It would never have occurred to me before that night that I could hurt Estroven. Now that the barriers were down, the limitations in my terms of our converse and understanding seemed intolerable to me. Quite soon, 2 or 3 nights later, I said to my companion as we finished our dinner, a special treat, sugared Cuttock porridge to celebrate a 20-mile run. Last spring, that night in the corner red dwelling, you said you wished I'd tell you more about paraverbal speech. Yes, I did. Do you want to see if I can teach you how to speak it? He laughed. You want to catch me lying. If you ever lied to me, it was long ago, and in another country. He was an honest person, but rarely a direct one. That tickled him, and he said, In another country, I may tell you other lies, but I thought you were forbidden to teach your mind science to the natives until we joined the Ecumen. Not forbidden. It's not done. I'll do it, though, if you like. And if I can, I'm no educer. There are special teachers of the skill. Yes, not in Altera, where there's a high occurrence of natural sensitivity and, they say, mothers might speak to their unborn babies. I don't know what the babies answer, but most of us have to be taught, as if it were a foreign language, or rather, as if it were our native language, but learned very late. I think he understood my motive in offering to teach him the skill, and he wanted very much to learn it. We had a go at it. I recalled what I could of how I had been educated at age 12. I told him to clear his mind, let it be dark. This he did, no doubt, more promptly and thoroughly than I had ever done. He was an adept of the Hendara, after all. Then my mind spoke to him as clearly as I could. No result. We tried it again. Since one cannot bespeak until one has been bespoken, until the telepathic potentiality has been sensitized by one clear reception, I had to get through to him first. I tried for half an hour, till I felt hoarse of brain. He looked crestfallen. I thought it would be easy for me, he confessed. We were both tired out and called the attempt off for the night. Our next efforts were no more successful. I tried my sending to Estroven while he slept, recalling that what my educer had told me about the occurrence of dream messages among pre-telepathic peoples, but it did not work. Perhaps my species lacks the capacity, he said. We have enough rumors and hints to have made up a word for the power, but I don't know of any proven instances of telepathy among us. So it was with my people for thousands of years. A few natural sensitives not comprehending their gift and lacking anyone to receive from or send to. All the rest latent, if that. You know I told you that except in the case of the born sensitive, the capacity, though it has a physiological basis, is a psychological one, a product of culture, a side effect of the use of the mind. Young children and defectives and members of unevolved or regressed societies can't mind speak. The mind must exist on a certain plane of complexity first. You can't build up amino acids out of hydrogen atoms. A good deal of complexifying has to take place first, the same situation. Abstract thought, varied social interaction, intricate cultural adjustments, aesthetic and ethical perception, all of it has had to reach a certain level before the connections can be made, before the potentiality can be touched at all. Perhaps we Gathenians haven't attained that level. You're far beyond it, but luck is involved, as in the creation of amino acids, or to take analogies on the cultural plane, only analogies, but they illuminate the scientific method, for instance, the use of concrete experimental techniques in science. There are peoples of the Ecumen who possess a high culture, a complex society, philosophies, art, ethics, a high style, and great achievement in all those fields. And yet, they have never learned to weigh a stone accurately. They can learn how, of course. Only for 500,000 years, they never did. There are peoples who have no higher mathematics at all, nothing beyond the simplest applied arithmetic. Every one of them is capable of understanding the calculus, but not one of them does or ever has. As a matter of fact, my own people, the Terrans, were ignorant until about 3,000 years ago of the uses of zero. That made Estroven blink. As for Gethin, what I'm curious about is whether the rest of us may find ourselves to have the capacity for foretelling, whether this too is a part of the evolution of the mind, if you'll teach us the techniques. You think it a useful accomplishment? Accurate philosophy? Accurate prophecy? Well, of course. You might have come to believe that. You might have come to believe that it's a useless one in order to practice it. Your Handara fascinates me, Hearth, but now and then I wonder if it isn't simply paradox developed into a way of life. We tried mind speech again. I had never before sent repeatedly to a total non-receiver. The experience was disagreeable. I began to feel like an atheist praying. Presently, Estroven yawned and said, I am deaf as a rock. We'd better sleep. I assented. He turned out the light, murmuring his brief praise of darkness. We burrowed down into our bags, and within a minute or two he was sliding into sleep as a swimmer slides into dark water. I felt his sleep as if it were my own. The emphatic bond was there, and then once more I bespoke him sleepily by his name. Therum. He sat bolt upright, for his voice rang out above me in the blackness, loud. Arik, is that you? No, only Genly I. I am bespeaking you. His breath caught. Silence. He fumbled with the chob stove, turned up the light, stared at me with his dark eyes full of fear. I dreamed, he said. I thought I was at home. You heard me mind speak. You called me. It was my brother. It was his voice I heard. He's dead. You called me. You called me Therum? This is more terrible than I had thought. He shook his head, as a man will do to shake off nightmare, and then put his face into his hands. Hearth, I'm very sorry. No. Call me by my name. If you can speak inside my skull with a dead man's voice, then you can call me by my name. Would he have called me Hearth? Oh, I see that's why there's no lying in this mind speech. It is a terrible thing. All right. Speak to me again. Wait. No. Go on. With his fierce, frightened gaze upon me, I bespoke him. Therum, my friend, there is nothing to fear between us. He kept on staring at me, so that I thought he had not understood, but he had. Ah, but there is, he said. After a while, controlling himself, he said calmly, You spoke in my language. Well, you don't know mine. You said there would be words, I know, yet I imagined it as an understanding. Empathy is another game, though not unconnected. It gave us the connection tonight, but in mind speech proper, the speech sensors of the brain are activated as well as... No. Tell me that later. Why do you speak in my brother's voice? His voice was strained. That I can't answer. I don't know. Tell me about him. Nusith. My full brother, Arik hath Remir Estroven, who was a year older than I, who would have been Lord of Estra. I left home, you know, for his sake. He has been dead 14 years. We were both silent for some time. I could not know or ask what lay behind his words. It had cost him too much to say the little he had said. I said at last, Bespeak me, Therum. Call me by my name. I knew he could. The rapport was there, or as the experts have it, the phrases were consonant, and of course he had as yet no idea how to raise the barrier voluntarily. Had I been a listener, I could have heard him think. No, he said. Never. Not yet. Not yet. But no amount of shock, awe, terror could restrain that insatiable, outreaching mind for long. After he had cut out the light, I again suddenly heard his stammer in my inward hearing. Genry. Even mind speaking, he never could say L properly. I replied at once. In the dark, he made an inarticulate sound of fear that had in it a slight edge of satisfaction. No more, he said aloud. After a while, we got to sleep at last. It never came easy to him. Not that he lacked the gift or could not develop the skill, but it disturbed him profoundly, and he could not take it for granted. He quickly learned to set up the barriers, but I'm not sure he felt he could count on them. Perhaps all of us were so when the first educers came back centuries ago from Rokanon's world, teaching the last art to us. Perhaps a Gathenian, being singularly complete, feels telepathic speech as a violation of completeness, a breach of integrity hard for him to tolerate. Perhaps it was Estraven's own character, in which candor and reserve were both strong. Every word he said rose out of a deeper silence. He heard my voice bespeaking him as a dead man's, his brother's voice. I did not know what, besides love and death, lay between him and that brother. But I knew that whenever I bespoke him, something in him winced away as if I touched a wound. So that intimacy of mind established between us was a bond, indeed, but an obscure and austere one, not so much admitting further light as I had expected it to, as showing the extent of the darkness. And day after day, we crept on eastward over the plain of ice. The midpoint in time of our journey, as planned, the 35th day, Odorni Anar, found us far short of our halfway point in space. By the sledge meter, we had indeed traveled about 400 miles, but perhaps only 3/4 of that was real forward gain, and we could estimate only very roughly how far still remained to go. We had spent days, miles, rations in our struggle to get up onto the ice. Estraven was not so worried as I by the hundreds of miles that still lay ahead of us. The sledge is lighter, he said. Towards the end it will be lighter still, and we can cut the rations if necessary. We have been eating very well, you know. I thought he was being ironic, but I should have known better. On the 40th day, and the two succeeding, we were snowed in by a blizzard. During these long hours of lying blotto in the tent, Estraven slept almost continuously and ate nothing, though he drank orsh or sugar water at mealtimes. He insisted that I eat, though only half rations. You have no experience in starvation, he said. I was humiliated. How much of you, lord of a domain and prime minister? Genry, we practice privation until we're experts at it. I was taught how to starve as a child at home in Estra and by the Handarada of the Rotharer fastness. I got out of the practice in Erinrong, true enough, but I began making up for it in Mishnori. Please do as I say, my friend. I know what I'm doing. He did, and I did. We went on for 4 more days of very bitter cold, never above -25 degrees, and then came another blizzard whooping up in our faces from the east on a gale wind. Within 2 minutes of the first strong gusts, the snow blew so thick that I could not see Estraven 6 feet away. I turned my back on him and the sledge into the plastering, blinding, suffocating snow in order to get my breath, and when a minute later I turned around, he was gone. The sledge was gone. Nothing was there. I took a few steps to where they had been and felt about. I shouted and could not hear my own voice. I was deaf and alone in a universe filled solid with small stinging gray streaks. I panicked and began to blunder forward, mind calling frantically, Therum! Right under my hand, kneeling, he said, Come on, give me a hand with the tent. I did so, and never mentioned my minute of panic. No need to. This blizzard lasted 2 days. There were 5 days lost, and there would be more. Nimmer and Honor are the months of the great storms. We're beginning to cut it rather fine, aren't we? I said one night as I measured out our Gitchy-Mitchy ration and put it to soak in hot water. He looked at me. His firm, broad face showed weight loss in deep shadows under the cheekbones. His eyes were sunken, and his mouth sorely chapped and cracked. God knows what I looked like when he looked like that. He smiled. With luck we shall make it, and without luck we shall not. It was what he had said from the start. With all my anxieties, my sense of taking a last desperate gamble, and so on, I had not been realistic enough to believe him. Even now I thought, surely when we've worked so hard. But the ice did not know how hard we worked. Why should it? Proportion is kept. How is your luck running, Theron? I asked at last. He did not smile at that, nor did he answer. Only after a while he said, I've been thinking about them all, down there. Down there for us had come to mean the south, the world below the plateau of ice, the region of earth, men, roads, cities, all of which had become hard to imagine as really existing. You know that I sent word to the king concerning you the day I left Mishori. I told him what Shusgis told me, that you were going to be sent to Pullafen Farm. At the time I wasn't clear as to my intent, but merely followed my impulse. I have thought the impulse through since. Something like this may happen. The king will see a chance to play Shifgrithor. Tybe will advise against it, but Argivan should be growing a little tired of Tybe by now, and may ignore his counsel. He will inquire. Where's the envoy, the guest of Karhide? Mishnori will lie. He died of horn fever this autumn, most lamentable. Then how does it happen that we are informed by our own embassy that he's in Pullafen Farm? He's not there, look for yourselves. No, of course not. We accept the word of the common cells of Orgarain. But a few weeks after these exchanges, the envoy appears in North Karhide, having escaped from Pullafen Farm. Consternation in Mishnori, indignation in Aaronrong, loss of face for the common cells caught lying. He will be a treasure, a long-lost hearth-brother to King Argivan Genry. For a while, you must send for your starship at once, at the first chance you get. Bring your people to Karhide and accomplish your mission at once before Argivan has had time to see the possible enemy in you, before Tybe or some other counselor frightens him once more, playing on his madness. If he makes the bargain with you, he will keep it. To break it would break his own Shifgrithor. The Harge kings keep their promises. But you must act fast and bring the ship down soon. I will if I receive the slightest sign of welcome. No. Forgive my advising you, but you must not wait for welcome. You will be welcomed, I think. So will the ship. Karhide has been sorely humbled this past half year. You will give Argivan the chance to turn the tables. I think he will take the chance. Very well, but you, meanwhile. I am Estraven the traitor. I have nothing whatever to do with you. At first, he agreed. You'll be able to hide out. There's danger at first. Oh yes, certainly. Our food was ready, and we fell to. Eating was so important and engrossing a business that we never talked any more while we ate. The taboo was now in its complete, perhaps original form. Not a word said till the last crumb was gone. When it was, he said, Well, I hope I've guessed well. You do forgive. You're giving me direct advice, I said, for there were certain things I had finally come to understand. Of course I do, Theron. Really, how can you doubt it? You know I have no Shifgrithor to wave. That amused him, but he was still brooding. Why, he said at last. Why did you come alone? Why were you sent alone? Everything still will depend on that ship coming. Why was it made so difficult for you and for us? It's the Ecumen's custom, and there are reasons for it. though in fact I begin to wonder if I've ever understood the reasons. I thought it was for your sake that I came alone, so obviously alone, so vulnerable that I could in myself pose no threat, change no balance, not an invasion but a mere messenger boy. But there's more to it than that. Alone, I cannot change your world, but I can be changed by it. Alone, I must listen as well as speak. Alone, the relationship I finally make, if I make one, is not impersonal and not only political. It is individual, it is personal, it is both more and less than political. Not we and they, not I and it, but I and thou. Not political, not pragmatic, but mystical. In a certain sense, the ecumen is not a body politic, but a body mystic. It considers beginnings to be extremely important. Beginnings and means. Its doctrine is just the reverse of the doctrine that the end justifies the means. It proceeds, therefore, by subtle ways, and slow ones, and queer, risky ones, rather as evolution does, which is, in certain senses, its model. So I was sent alone, for your sake, or for my own? I don't know. Yes, it has made things difficult, but I ask you as profitably why you've never seen fit to invent airborne vehicles. One small stolen airplane would have spared you and me a great deal of difficulty. How would it ever occur to a sane man that he could fly? Estravent said sternly. It was a fair response on a world where no living thing is winged, and the very angels of the Yomesh hierarchy of the holy do not fly but only drift, wingless, down to earth like soft snow falling, like the wind-born seeds of that flowerless world. Towards the middle of Nimmer, after much wind and bitter cold, we came into a quiet weather for many days. If there was storm, it was far south of us, down there, and we inside the blizzard had only an all but windless overcast. At first, the overcast was thin, so the air was vaguely radiant with an even, sourceless sunlight reflected from both clouds and snow, from above and below. Overnight, the weather thickened somewhat. All brightness was gone, leaving nothing. We stepped out of the tent onto nothing. Sledge and tent were there. Estravin stood beside me, but neither he nor I cast any shadow. There was dull light all around, everywhere. When we walked on the crisp snow, no shadow showed the footprint. We left no track. Sledge, tent, himself, myself, nothing else at all. No sun, no sky, no horizon, no world. A whitish-gray void in which we appeared to hang. The illusion was so complete that I had trouble keeping my balance. My inner ears were used to confirmation from my eyes as to how I stood. They got none. I might as well be blind. It was all right while we loaded up, but hauling with nothing ahead, nothing to look at, nothing for the eye to touch, as it were, was at first disagreeable and then exhausting. We were on skis, on a good surface of fern without sastrugi, and solid, that was certain, for 5,000 or 6,000 feet down. We should have been making good time, but we kept slowing down, groping our way across the totally unobstructed plain, and it took a strong effort of will to speed up to a normal pace. Every slight variation in the surface came as a jolt, as in climbing stairs, the unexpected stair or the expected but absent stair, for we could not see it ahead. There was no shadow to show it. We skied blind with our eyes open. Day after day was like this, and we began to shorten our hauls, for by mid-afternoon both of us would be sweating and shaking with strain and fatigue. I came to long for snow, for blizzard, for anything, but morning after morning, we came out of the tent into the void, the white weather, what Estrin called the unshadow. One day about noon, adorning Nimmer, the 61st day of our journey, that bland white nothingness about us began to flow and writhe. I thought my eyes were fooling me, as they had been doing often, and paid scant attention to the dim, meaningless commotion of the air until, suddenly, I caught a glimpse of a small, wan, dead sun overhead, and looking down from the sun straight ahead, I saw a huge black shape come hulking out of the void towards us. Black tentacles writhed upward, groping out. I stopped dead in my tracks, slowing Estroven around on his skis, for we were both in harness hauling. What is it? He stared at the dark, monstrous forms hidden in the fog, and said at last, "The crags. It must be the Escherhoff crags," and pulled on. We were miles from the things, which I had taken to be almost within an arm's reach. As the white weather turned to a thick, low mist and then cleared off, we saw them plainly before sunset. Nunataks, great, scored and ravaged pinnacles of rock jutting up out of the ice, no more of them showing than shows of an iceberg above the sea. Cold, drowned mountains, dead for eons. They showed us to be somewhat north of our shortest course, if we could trust the Eldron map that was all we had. The next day we turned for the first time, a little south of east. All right. So I got the page count wrong. There's about 40 pages left of the book. So I think we'll wrap it up for tonight, and I'm planning to pick up again on Sunday. We'll finish it up, and then maybe do like a short something from a contemporary author. All right. I hope you're all staying safe and well. Have a good night.